Cop harasses black woman, claims her ID. Is fake, it's her private jet they're standing next to. Midnight shadows stretched across the tarmac as a lone figure stepped out of a sleek black SUV. Illuminated by the stark fluorescent lights of a private hangar, the woman's silhouette radiated confidence and quiet authority. She was not a celebrity, at least not in the mainstream sense, yet her aura commanded attention. Even from a distance, you could feel there was something extraordinary about her, something untouchable and entirely her own. The rumble of jet engines drummed in the background, a low, steady pulse that hinted at power and possibility. Nobody expected a confrontation here, of all places, but sometimes fate has other plans. Aisha Reynolds was determined to get home before dawn. She had spent the last 3 days at an investors' conference in New York City, and the demands of her schedule left her exhausted. Despite her weariness, she felt a certain satisfaction. 2 years earlier, she had founded an innovative biotech startup dedicated to developing affordable treatments for chronic illnesses that disproportionately affected marginalized communities. Now, she was the subject of numerous interviews and the recipient of major backing from a group of venture capitalists who finally recognized her brilliance, though some grudgingly. As the black SUV glided through the sparsely lit roads toward John F. Kennedy International Airport, Aisha glanced at her phone. The digital clock read 12:17 a.m. She was eager to board her private jet, an impressive Bombardier Global 7500. A gift to herself, though gift barely encompassed the significance of such a milestone. Growing up in a neighborhood teetering on the edge of neglect, she had witnessed heartbreak and shattered dreams. Yet with relentless perseverance, she studied, innovated, and built her empire. The private jet was more than a status symbol. It was proof of what determination and intelligence could accomplish. Even when society kept insisting you stay in your lane, Aisha's driver, Marcus, was one of her oldest friends. He had watched her rise from tutoring fellow high school classmates to graduating at the top of her class at Stanford on a scholarship she had fought tooth and nail to secure. They exchanged easy conversation about the past few days. Marcus teased her about the swarm of reporters who trailed her after each conference session. He recounted how the paparazzi nearly tripped over each other, swarming the SUV as she ducked inside. Exasperated yet composed, Aisha sighed, rubbing her temples. "It's part of the job now," she conceded. "So many of these interviewers think it's about my personal life, not my actual work." Marcus nodded sympathetically, keeping his eyes on the dimly lit route. "They want stories they can sensationalize. You just keep doing what you're doing. The rest will follow." Aisha offered a small smile, appreciative of his unwavering support. The SUV pulled up to a checkpoint near the private hangar. In this hush of early morning, she expected a swift check from the TSA contractors assigned to the private jet area. Yet, something about the guardhouse's bright lights made her heart skip a beat. She tried to dismiss it as travel fatigue, but an uneasy feeling settled in the pit of her stomach. Stepping out of the SUV, she was greeted by a chilly breeze that tugged at her tailored black coat. The hush of the tarmac was occasionally broken by the distant roar of a commercial airliner. Aisha handed her documents, a passport and her driver's license, to the on-duty TSA officer stationed outside the private jet gates. For a moment, she allowed her gaze to wander toward her airplane, gleaming under massive floodlights, a sleek testament to her life's work. Marcus began unloading her luggage. Usually, at this hour, everything proceeded smoothly. A quick verification of identity, scanning of items, and then a short walk to the plane's cabin. Tonight, however, the officer didn't hand her documents back immediately. Instead, he looked them over with painstaking deliberation, flipping the driver's license back and forth. his features twisted in a perplexed frown. Aisha met his stare calmly, though her pulse quickened. She had experienced awkward moments in first-class lounges, more than once moments where flight attendants questioned whether she belonged there. But this was different. The officer, a tall white man with close-cropped sandy hair, abruptly called another agent over. Their hushed conversation seemed fraught with tension. Her exhaustion flared into annoyance. She was too tired for microaggressions or random checks. "Is there a problem?" she asked politely, trying to keep irritation from her voice. "Ma'am, we're just verifying your ID," the officer said in a clipped tone. His name tag read Caldwell. Behind him, the second TSA officer, a younger woman named Hill, studied Aisha's passport with the same suspicious expression. Their body language made Aisha's nerves thrum with apprehension. Over the years, Aisha had learned to maintain a serene composure, even when confronted with blatant disrespect. But the time for polite acceptance had frayed. She was a well-known entrepreneur, a keynote speaker at some of the most exclusive conferences in the world. She had enough receipts, literal and figurative, to fill a warehouse. Yet here she stood at her own plane, where two officers eyed her like a wanted fugitive. Her calm veneer cracked slightly when Officer Caldwell asked her for additional proof of identity. She had already supplied a valid passport and driver's license, both government-issued. What more could they need? Her fatigue morphed into a near frenzy of agitation. She fished out business cards, letters from the conference with her name prominently displayed, and even her corporate ID still. Caldwell's suspicious glare didn't waver. Marcus stepped in, speaking in a measured tone. "She's the CEO of Aurora Innovations. If you'd like, I can get a security officer from the hangar to confirm she's our passenger." Caldwell didn't even glance at Marcus. "We'll decide what's necessary." "Step aside, please," he said, focusing on Aisha. Something about the way he said, "we'll decide," made Aisha's skin crawl. Memories of earlier injustices flickered in her mind, judgmental stares from security guards in upscale stores, patronizing remarks from bankers who initially refused to fund her project. Here she was, presumably at the pinnacle of success, yet it felt like she was right back in that place of suspicion. She looked around at the deserted expanse of the tarmac. Her jet's engines were already humming gently, the pilot and crew prepped for an immediate departure. She imagined how bizarre this scene must look to them, a wealthy black woman, singled out at her own plane, forced to prove she had every right to be there. Caldwell radioed for a verification unit, which, as far as she could tell, meant more TSA officers showing up to examine the same documentation. Aisha's frustration surged. She tried to remain composed, but each extra minute spent out in the cold, being interrogated, chipped away at her patience. Night deepened around them. Another pair of TSA officials arrived, stepping out of a white service van with official government decals. They approached her cautiously, as though she might flee. Aisha's breath caught in her throat. It was surreal. Here she was, about to board the private jet she owned, while these officers treated her like a criminal. They scrutinized her passport again, shining flashlights on the watermark and the fine print. The older of the two new arrivals, a graying man named Officer Berry, pulled Caldwell aside. Their murmured exchange was punctuated by sidelong glances in Aisha's direction. She caught bits of their conversation, "doesn't look right," and could be a fake. Finally, Officer Berry approached her with a matter-of-fact expression. "Ma'am, we have reason to believe that this identification is fraudulent." Aisha's heart pounded. She'd heard stories of black travelers being confronted by baseless allegations, but never imagined she'd be the star of one. "This is preposterous," she snapped before she could stop herself. "I just used the same passport 2 weeks ago in London. No one had any issues. If you have a system, run the ID." Officer Berry held his hand up, attempting a display of authority. We've tried to verify it, and our scanners flagged an inconsistency. That means we need to go through additional protocols." Her voice was unsteady with outrage. "What inconsistency?" "Let me see the report." "You can't see TSA internal documents, ma'am," Caldwell interjected firmly. In a moment of frustration, Aisha realized she was trembling. Whether from anger or the nipping cold or both, she didn't know. "So you're telling me," she said through gritted teeth, "that I'm not allowed to board my plane, the plane registered in my name, because you decided my passport is suspicious?" The silence that followed was thick with tension. She glanced over at Marcus, who wore an expression of disbelief. This was beyond humiliating. Officer Berry spoke again, his tone forcibly professional. "Until this matter is resolved, we can't let you through." Aisha clenched her fists at her side. A swirl of emotions coursed through her disbelief, anger, humiliation, and, beneath it all, a gnawing sorrow that despite all her achievements, she could be reduced to a suspect at the drop of a hat. The bizarre standoff stretched on. Lights from the hangar cast elongated shadows across the group. Aisha's pilot, Captain Millstone, had ventured over to see what the commotion was. He was a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, ex-military, and used to chain of command procedures. His calm presence offered some relief. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked, voice courteous but firm. "We have a flight plan filed, and this is indeed Miss Aisha Reynolds, the plane's owner." "That remains to be determined," Caldwell retorted, barely glancing at the pilot. Captain Millstone's eyes narrowed. "Her name is on the registration. I have copies of all relevant documents." Aisha felt a surge of gratitude for his intervention. The pilot had known her for a year, ever since she purchased the Bombardier. He understood the intricacies of private aviation law and had guided her through flight plans and certifications. Surely, hearing it from an ex-Air Force pilot would resolve the issue. But Caldwell and Berry appeared resolute in their suspicion. The second officer, Hill, spoke up in a halting voice, as if uncertain about contradicting her superiors. "I think we should at least check the plane's documentation. That could help confirm if Miss Reynolds is who she says she is." For a fleeting moment, Aisha thought they might be moving toward a rational resolution. Captain Millstone retrieved a folder from the cockpit containing proof of ownership, the aircraft tail number matching official records, and the flight plan with her name clearly listed as the passenger. He handed the folder to Officer Hill, who examined it meticulously, but Caldwell remained unconvinced. "We'll contact the relevant aviation authorities," he declared, as though he alone had the power to override standard procedure. The entire spectacle felt absurd. The alleged inconsistency in her passport turned into a catch-all rationale for ignoring every piece of legitimate evidence. Time dragged on. 1 a.m. PASSED, 2 a.m. loomed. Aisha's frustration had given way to indignation so strong it buzzed like static in her ears. She stepped aside, calling her legal counsel, Victoria Haynes, who answered groggily but immediately snapped to alertness when she heard the details. Victoria promised to contact the TSA's legal department, but warned it might take time. While Aisha was on the phone, Caldwell stepped closer, his voice low and steely. "I don't know who you think you are, but forging government documents is a federal offense." She stared at him, flabbergasted. "I haven't forged anything. This is insane." He smirked, a small cold twitch of his lips. "We get a lot of high rollers through here who think they're above the law, and I've seen forged passports that look more convincing than yours." Aisha could hardly believe her ears. "More convincing than a real passport," she snapped. "This is blatant harassment. You can call it whatever you want," Caldwell said, shrugging. "All I see is a suspect with questionable documents. Every rational fiber in her being screamed to keep calm, to remain composed. But the years of microaggressions, the judgments, the sheer exhaustion, all conspired to shatter that calm. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with a fury so deep it felt seismic. "Do you even realize what you're implying?" she demanded. "I own that jet. I am the CEO of a major biotech company. And I can promise you, by the time this is over, you'll regret treating me like this." Caldwell's eyes flashed with a strange mix of annoyance and caution. He clearly didn't appreciate the threat. But for once, Aisha didn't care. She was through playing nice with bullies. In the endless wait that followed, Aisha couldn't help recalling the countless obstacles she'd faced just to get where she was. After her father lost his job when she was a teenager, her family struggled to make ends meet. She worked 2 part-time jobs while maintaining perfect grades, certain that academic excellence was her ticket out of poverty. When she was accepted into Stanford, a local newspaper ran a story about her, calling her a rising star. But that praise came wrapped in condescending questions about whether she deserved the scholarship. She realized this moment at JFK was an echo of that same prejudice, magnified to a brazen scale. Her achievements, even the symbol of her success, the private jet, were under siege because she didn't fit the stereotype of who is supposed to own such luxury. Aisha's phone buzzed. Victoria was on the line again, voice urgent. "I've spoken with a TSA liaison. This is definitely not standard procedure. We're filing a complaint, but it might take time for them to contact the local TSA manager on duty." "How long?" Aisha asked, forcing steadiness into her voice. "Possibly an hour or more." "Maybe less if I can get the right people on the phone," Victoria replied. "In the meantime, be cautious. Don't give them any reason to escalate the situation." Aisha swallowed her frustration. "It's already escalated. They're calling me a forger." Victoria's anger crackled through the receiver. "We'll handle that, Aisha. Just try to stay safe and wait for me to call you back." She ended the call, feeling both relieved and distressed. She knew Victoria was formidable in a legal fight, but the bureaucratic nature of TSA procedures could be a labyrinth. And she had no idea what other humiliations might be forced upon her in the meantime. Another tense half-hour crept by. The pilot and crew remained at a respectful distance, helplessly awaiting instructions. Marcus hovered protectively nearby. Officer Hill had retreated to a side area to make phone calls. Occasionally, she glanced at Aisha with a frown that might have been sympathy or hesitation. Meanwhile, Caldwell and Berry swapped shifts, standing near Aisha, not letting her wander far. She was effectively detained without being told so. Her phone rang again. This time, it was a local news reporter, Caden Farrell, who had interviewed her the previous afternoon. Caden had gotten wind of an incident at JFK involving a high-profile entrepreneur. The rumor mill churned fast. Aisha hesitated before answering, but she recalled Caden's empathy and fairness during the interview. Maybe some external spotlight would help. She picked up, speaking in a low voice, summarizing the standoff. Caden's shock was palpable. "This is huge," he murmured. "I'll see if my photographer is still at the station. Would you be comfortable with a short interview if we come by?" She hesitated, glancing at the officers. The last thing she needed was to antagonize them further. But the idea of media attention was tempting. So often, these kinds of incidents got swept under the rug unless someone shined a public light on them. "Give me a few minutes," she said finally. "I need to see if that's even possible." She hung up and thought about it. If the TSA was humiliating her in private, maybe it was time to escalate. She didn't want a spectacle, but she didn't want to stay voiceless either. While she mulled the idea, Caldwell reapproached, holding her passport up as though it were a piece of incriminating evidence. "We're going to have to place you under investigative detention," he announced. The words sunk like stones in her gut. "Detention?" she repeated. "On what grounds?" We have the right to detain anyone who is suspected of presenting fraudulent documentation, Caldwell said stiffly. An official from the Point Us Department of State is being contacted. Until then, you'll be escorted to a holding area. No, she exclaimed, voice rising. That's not. She caught the adrenaline fueling her anger. This was the exact reaction Victoria warned her about. Yet how could she not react? They were turning her life into a nightmare because they refused to believe a black woman could possibly own a private jet and a legitimate passport. Marcus stepped between them, his broad frame blocking Caldwell's view. You can't just take her. She hasn't been read any rights, and you don't have probable cause. Officer Berry's expression flickered with uncertainty. We have the authority. Marcus cut him off. I know the law too. I was in the Marines. If you're arresting her, you better have a warrant or a clear set of charges. Tension soared. Caldwell's hand hovered near his holster, and Berry laid a cautionary hand on Caldwell's arm. Hill stood off to the side, looking increasingly uncomfortable. The shouting might have continued unchecked, if not for a sudden interruption, the hum of an approaching vehicle. Headlights bounced across the tarmac, and moments later, a black sedan pulled up near them. A tall black man in a sharp suit stepped out, his stride purposeful. "Miss Reynolds?" he asked in a measured, authoritative tone. Aisha looked at him with wary curiosity. "Yes." He extended a hand, showing her a business card. "My name is Joel Chambers, with the office of the TSA Ombudsman. Miss Haynes contacted our office, and I came here personally once I heard the circumstances. Let's see if we can de-escalate." Aisha almost sagged with relief. "Thank you," she managed. She shot Caldwell a pointed look, then turned back to Joel. "They're claiming my passport is fraudulent and talking about detaining me." Joel's expression tightened. He turned to Caldwell. "Officer, have you confirmed the alleged fraud with the appropriate scanners?" Caldwell bristled. "It came up with an inconsistency." That's enough reason to detain her. An inconsistency could mean anything from a minor data entry error to a scanner glitch. "We have protocols for that," Joel said evenly. "Did you run the passport number through the official database? Did you cross-check her personal information?" Caldwell's jaw tightened. "We're in the process." "Then you haven't conclusively established fraud," Joel pointed out. His tone was calm yet unyielding. "While you proceed with standard checks, Miss, Reynolds should be allowed to remain in a more comfortable setting, especially given that she's the owner of that aircraft." He gestured at the Bombardier Global 7500. Berry, who seemed more amenable to reason, spoke up. "It's unusual for a single inconsistency to hold up everything. Generally, we do a second scan, or check with Customs and Border Protection, or call a supervisor to validate." Joel nodded. "Exactly. Let's do that. I've already spoken with the TSA Federal Security Director's office here at JFK. They've expedited the cross-check and should confirm the ID's validity soon." Aisha exhaled slowly. Someone was finally talking sense. Yet Caldwell's stance remained combative, arms folded across his chest. He didn't seem pleased that a higher-level official was intervening. Even with Joel's presence, tension simmered. The minutes ticked by. Aisha wanted to pace, to call Victoria again, to do something. But she sensed that any sudden movement might trigger Caldwell's hostility. So she folded her arms protectively around herself, focusing on breathing, on not letting her anger boil over. Chambers asked Berry and Hill to re-scan Aisha's passport with a mobile document reader in the service van. In the interim, Caldwell hovered close enough to eavesdrop on every word, but far enough to avoid direct confrontation. Marcus, still visibly upset, whispered to Aisha, "I hate that this is happening to you. You've worked so hard." She pressed her lips together. "Thank you. Let's hope Chambers can sort this out quickly." Despite her outward control, her mind spiraled. What if there was some bizarre system error marking her ID as invalid? Bureaucratic snaffus happened. Even so, the aggressive stance of Caldwell reeked of racial profiling. She wondered how many others, lacking resources or connections, had endured similar harassment without recourse. Eventually, Hill returned. "Miss Reynolds, we've done the second scan." Her voice was subdued, eyes flicking nervously to Caldwell. "It appears there was a data glitch. The passport is valid." Aisha's heart jolted with relief and anger. All of this for a glitch. Joel Chambers looked from Hill to Caldwell. "Officer Caldwell, do you have any further reasons to hold Miss Reynolds?" Caldwell stood stiff, resentment etched on his face. "I want to verify her driver's license too," he said stubbornly. "We need to be sure everything is consistent." Aisha pinched the bridge of her nose, fighting an urge to snap. "You just verified my passport is legitimate. Isn't that enough?" Chambers, trying to maintain professionalism, spoke gently. "Officer Caldwell, typically the passport alone is sufficient for identification. Unless you have evidence of wrongdoing, we should clear her." For a moment, it seemed Caldwell might argue further. His face was taut with frustration, almost as if he was disappointed he couldn't catch her in a lie. But Berry intervened. "Let's finalize the paperwork and let her proceed." The tension that had gripped the night slowly ebbed. Aisha saw Caldwell's glare flick briefly toward her plane. The unspoken question in his eyes was, "How dare someone like you own something so grand?" But the facts were on record now, validated by official systems. He could no longer hold her hostage to prejudice. Just as Berry and Hill started to gather the documents and issue her clearance, headlights once again swept across the tarmac. A news van pulled up. Caden Farrell had arrived, camera operator in tow. Aisha's heart skipped. Would the TSA try to block the reporter from covering this? She felt a swirl of conflicting emotions, embarrassment at being the center of this spectacle, but also a desperate need for accountability. Caden hopped out, mic in hand, his camera operator right behind him. "Miss Reynolds, Caden Farrell from Daily Metro News. Can you tell us what's happening here?" Aisha glanced at Chambers, who gave a subtle nod, indicating it was her choice whether to speak. She weighed the risk. If she spoke publicly, she could be shining a glaring spotlight on TSA procedures. But maybe that was exactly what needed to happen, so others wouldn't face a similar ordeal in silence. She cleared her throat. "I'm being held up by TSA despite having valid documentation. They claimed my passport was fraudulent, but it's been verified. I've lost hours of my time, been subjected to suspicion with no legitimate cause. And let's just say, it's not the first time I've been racially profiled." Caden's camera operator swung the lens toward Caldwell, who stiffened. Chambers, stepping delicately, added, "We're resolving an unfortunate misunderstanding. Miss Reynolds is free to continue her travel." Caldwell muttered something under his breath, but he didn't dare speak on camera. Caden asked a few follow-up questions, but Aisha kept her answers measured. She didn't want to appear hysterical, though the burning embers of indignation still glowed in her chest. The camera captured her standing near her private jet, regal yet visibly drained, and the uniformed TSA officers in the background. The scene was powerful. The image alone told a story of inequality, of a powerful black woman forced to prove her right to occupy her own space. Once the interview wrapped, Caden promised a fair report, citing the official documents verifying her identity and the hours-long detention. "Your story matters, Aisha," he said quietly. "People need to see this side of what can happen." She nodded, grateful but a little shaky. As Caden's team left, she realized her phone was buzzing non-stop with social media notifications. Word traveled fast somehow. The rumor of the fiasco had already spread. Although it was almost 3 in the morning, people across social platforms were wide awake, fueling a growing outrage. Clips of Caden's live stream popped up. Supporters rallied behind her, calling for TSA accountability. Others, predictably, questioned why a random check was such a big deal. Trolling comments implied she must have done something suspicious to attract scrutiny. The swirling chatter felt overwhelming, yet she recognized the potential for good. This was her opportunity to highlight systemic issues that rarely see the light of day. Meanwhile, Joel Chambers finished speaking on the phone with the TSA Federal Security Director. After ending the call, he approached Aisha. "Miss Reynolds, on behalf of the agency, I'd like to apologize for the inconvenience and distress caused by these procedural missteps. The director will reach out to you formally." She studied him. His sincere demeanor suggested he genuinely regretted the incident. "Thank you," she replied quietly. "I appreciate that you came here personally." He dipped his head. "We take allegations of profiling and harassment very seriously. If you choose to file a complaint, I assure you it will be investigated." Behind him, Caldwell stood near the guard post, arms folded tightly. As if sensing her gaze, he turned. Their eyes locked. The resentment in his stare was unmistakable. For all that had transpired, he didn't appear remorseful. He seemed more angered that she had escaped his control. He mouthed something that looked suspiciously like, "This isn't over." A shudder rolled down Aisha's spine. She made a mental note to be vigilant. Sometimes, fights you think you've won continue behind closed doors. Finally, around 3:30 in the morning, Aisha and Marcus were cleared to board her bombardier. The pilot greeted her at the top of the steps, offering a comforting smile. "Let's get you home," he said gently. She settled into one of the plush leather seats, exhaling shakily. The lights in the cabin glowed soft and warm, and for the first time that night, she felt safe. Marcus placed her carry-on in the overhead compartment, then sank into a seat across from her, relief evident in his eyes. "Unbelievable," he murmured. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that." Aisha managed a small smile. "You have nothing to apologize for. You stood up for me back there." He shrugged. "Had to. You'd do the same for me." The private jet's engines roared to life. As the plane taxied to the runway, Aisha found her mind a whirl of conflicting emotions: anger at the injustice, gratitude for her allies, and a grim sense of resolution. She was determined not to let this pass without seeking redress. 30,000 feet above the ground, in the hushed sanctuary of her private cabin, Aisha tried to rest. Sleep, however, eluded her. She stared at the starless sky beyond the window, haunted by Caldwell's animosity. Racial profiling wasn't new to her, but rarely had it been so blatant or humiliating. She recalled the moment she first set foot on her own jet, a triumphant day filled with hope that her achievements would stand as testament to what a girl from a struggling neighborhood could do. Tonight had been the rude awakening that no matter how high you climb, the world can still try to pull you down because of the color of your skin. Yet that same world had also produced allies like Joel Chambers, Caden Farrell, and the supportive swirl of online voices condemning the TSA's actions. Maybe the tide was turning. Maybe not everyone was like Caldwell, bent on reinforcing the old systems of prejudice. She pressed her forehead against the cool cabin window, letting the hum of the engines lull her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was resolved to fight. This wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had been unjustly questioned, dismissed, or harmed because of deep-rooted biases. Change often came at a personal cost, but she was willing to pay it. A few hours later, they landed at Van Nuys Airport in Los Angeles, where Aisha's local driver waited. Sunlight streaked the horizon with pastel shades of pink and orange. Marcus parted ways with her to return the SUV to the local service in New York. He would catch a commercial flight home later. Exhausted, she sank into the back seat of her LA driver's car, letting the city's busy streets pass in a blur. Her phone showed dozens of missed calls and hundreds of messages, friends, acquaintances, journalists, even a few government officials. Word had spread nationwide about the fiasco at JFK. CNN and MSNBC had picked up Caden Farrell's footage, turning her experience into a national talking point. On social media, hashtags referencing TSA profiling and hashtag #IsStandWithAisha were trending. She realized with a jolt that the personal ordeal she endured might have ripple effects far beyond what she expected. Once home, she managed a quick shower before collapsing into bed. The day would be full of press statements and damage control, but right now, she needed at least a brief respite. When she finally woke, it was late morning. She rushed to her laptop to check email. Sure enough, her PR team had been inundated with requests for interviews. Even her company's social media channels were buzzing. Some investors had reached out with concern but also support. They saw the potential good in tackling the issue head-on. A flood of messages came from strangers, two people sharing their own stories of racial profiling, thanking Aisha for speaking up. While uplifting, the sheer volume was overwhelming. She had inadvertently become a public face for a broader struggle. Her work as CEO kept her in the spotlight, but this was a different realm, a civil rights controversy that demanded immediate engagement. She decided to hold a short press conference the following day. For now, she needed to gather facts and figure out her legal stance. Victoria would help coordinate. The question that loomed was how best to address Caldwell's actions specifically and whether to file a formal lawsuit. That evening, the TSA released a statement acknowledging the unfortunate incident involving Miss Aisha Reynolds, citing a technical glitch in verifying her passport. The statement offered a lukewarm apology, but mostly emphasized that the TSA values diversity and takes accusations of discrimination seriously. It concluded by saying they would continue to review the events and take appropriate corrective measures if necessary. Aisha read it with a bitter taste in her mouth. The carefully worded release skirted any admission of racial bias. It was a typical bureaucratic approach, placate the public without fully owning responsibility. She was sure the statement had been carefully vetted by their legal and PR teams. But it did little to quell the mounting criticism. Online discourse raged with calls for Caldwell's suspension. Others questioned whether standard training or oversight was enough to prevent such incidents. This was no longer just about Aisha's ordeal. It had grown into a broader debate on systemic profiling and TSA authority. In the middle of this media storm, Aisha received an unexpected package at her home. It was a plain envelope containing printouts of emails allegedly exchanged within the TSA. Some lines were redacted, but it was clear that at least one of the officers had singled her out before verifying her ID was flagged something about a suspicious individual by the private hangar. She felt a chill reading it. The language hinted that the suspicion was pegged to her the moment they saw her. The private hangar side of the airport usually caters to wealthy travelers, and the unspoken question was, why did they assume a successful black woman was automatically suspicious? No sender name was on the envelope. A whistleblower? Possibly. She forwarded it all to Victoria. The next day, cameras flashed incessantly as Aisha stepped up to the podium in a small auditorium her team had rented. She wore a simple, elegant, grey pantsuit, professional but unpretentious. Marcus stood at the back of the room, along with colleagues from Aurora Innovations, offering silent support. She read a prepared statement about the incident, her voice steady despite her internal nerves. No one, regardless of race, gender, or background, should be treated as a criminal without cause, she said. We must confront the biases that persist within systems meant to protect us. Reporters peppered her with questions. Did she plan to sue the TSA? Would she call for Caldwell's dismissal? Aisha answered carefully. She explained she was exploring legal options, and while she demanded accountability, Her focus was on ensuring sweeping changes so that future travelers wouldn't face the same fate. Her concluding remarks were a call to action. It's not enough for agencies to issue apologies. We need transparency, reform, and justice for those who've been wronged. The room erupted in a flurry of flashes and shouts, capturing her resolute expression. After the conference, Aisha sank into a chair backstage, nerves shot. Victoria joined her, patting her shoulder. "You did great," her lawyer said. Aisha let out a shaky breath. "I hope so. I don't want this to turn into another media circus where nothing changes." Victoria nodded. "I'm filing official complaints. We'll also see if civil rights organizations want to join. You're not alone in this fight." Just then, Marcus approached, his phone in hand. "You might want to see this," he said, pressing play on a video. It was Caldwell, recorded at a different incident months ago, forcibly removing a black family from a security line. The footage was grainy, but showed him yelling about IDs and compliance. The father in the video could be heard pleading that their papers were in order. Another, hauntingly similar scenario. Aisha's stomach twisted. "This is a pattern," she whispered. She locked eyes with Victoria, who nodded grimly. "This changes things. It's evidence that Caldwell might be systematically targeting black travelers." Word spread about the new footage. Civil rights organizations quickly rallied behind Aisha's cause, calling for an investigation into Caldwell's record. Former TSA employees came forward, describing workplace hostility and thinly veiled racism. One even claimed Caldwell had boasted about catching fake IDs from certain people. The news cycle intensified. Caldwell and the JFK TSA leadership faced mounting pressure. Meanwhile, Aisha's supporters organized a petition demanding Caldwell's termination and a broader re-evaluation of TSA training. Tens of thousands signed in just a few hours. Aisha felt torn, a mixture of grim satisfaction that justice might be served and sadness that such actions were necessary in the first place. She never asked to become a lightning rod for reform, but perhaps it was destiny. Throughout these tumultuous days, Aisha tried to maintain her responsibilities at Aurora Innovations. The company had critical partnerships and a major product launch on the horizon, but her phone never stopped buzzing. Media requests, legal updates, protest invitations. It was draining. One evening, she stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, dark circles under her eyes. The emotional toll was relentless. Despite the outpouring of support, hateful messages also peppered her inbox, vile insults that stung even if she tried to ignore them. Racial slurs, threats implying she was lying for attention or playing the race card. The ugliest segments of society had found her. She pressed the faucet lever, splashing cold water on her face. "It's worth it," she reminded herself. If this confrontation could protect someone else from a nightmare scenario, she owed it to them to keep pushing. A few days later, the TSA Federal Security Director for JFK, Madeline Kurtz, requested a private meeting with Aisha. Initially, Aisha was hesitant, suspecting damage control, but Victoria encouraged her to attend, suggesting they might glean more information. They convened in a neutral office space near LAX. Director Kurtz arrived with 2 assistants and a legal advisor. Aisha and Victoria sat across the table, wearing polite but guarded expressions. Kurtz offered a tight smile. "Miss Reynolds, thank you for coming. I understand this has been a distressing time. I want to apologize personally." Aisha nodded curtly. "I appreciate that, but this isn't about me alone. It's about systemic issues within the TSA." Kurtz's gaze flickered. "Yes, we take these allegations seriously. Officer Caldwell has been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation." Aisha's breath caught at the confirmation. "And the others involved? They're cooperating with the inquiry." "We also plan to roll out additional training protocols for our personnel," Kurtz said. leaning forward slightly, as if to convey earnestness. "We don't want a repeat of what happened." Victoria's voice held a note of skepticism. "Training is fine, but we also need accountability. This can't be resolved simply by shifting blame onto a few bad apples." Kurtz exhaled. "Agreed. We're open to discussing how to ensure deeper institutional changes." Aisha spoke up. "Then let's start by acknowledging we have a larger problem than just Caldwell. There are cultural and procedural flaws that enable such harassment." Kurtz nodded, scribbling notes. "Would you be interested in consulting on the reforms? Your perspective could help shape policy." The offer surprised Aisha. She glanced at Victoria, who gave a cautious nod. "I'd be open to it," she said slowly, "on the condition that it's a genuine partnership, not a PR stunt." A faint smile tugged at Kurtz's lips. "Understood. We'll provide official proposals soon." Despite these gestures, the legal aspect pressed on. Victoria filed a civil rights complaint against TSA, naming Caldwell specifically for racial discrimination. Other travelers with similar stories joined the complaint. Within weeks, it took shape as a class action lawsuit. The Department of Justice announced it would investigate, putting additional heat on the agency to enact real reforms. In the swirling vortex of legal documents and depositions, Aisha found herself in a precarious position. She believed in constructive dialogue, like the meeting with Director Kurtz, but also recognized that lawsuits might be the only tool powerful enough to force lasting institutional change. Amid all this, an unexpected figure reached out, a man named Daniel Brooks, who had once worked with Aisha on a philanthropic project during her early days of running Aurora Innovations. He was now the Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights in a federal agency. They arranged a phone call. "Aisha," Daniel began warmly, "it's been too long, though I wish the circumstances were better. I've been following your situation. I'm in a position to help push policy changes at a federal level if you're interested in giving input." Her heart skipped. "Daniel, that's incredible. Any chance we could push for mandated anti-bias training and external oversight of TSA practices?" "Absolutely," he replied. "We can't promise an overnight fix, but we can open the door to real enforceable standards." They discussed specifics for an hour. When the call ended, Aisha felt a surge of hope. Maybe, she thought, this is the moment that leads to genuine, far-reaching reform. As the lawsuit proceeded and interviews continued, some corners of the public began to argue that Aisha was seeking publicity or milking the situation. The usual suspects online slung mud, accusing her of greed or revenge. Right-wing pundits claimed she was trying to discredit law enforcement by crying racism. At first, these attacks stung. But Aisha soon realized that every significant step toward equality had faced backlash. She resolved to keep forging ahead. Her allies, including many leading civil rights advocates, rallied around her. A group of prominent black entrepreneurs wrote an open letter condemning TSA's track record on racial profiling, citing Aisha's case as the tipping point for major reform. In a dramatic twist, Officer Caldwell, no longer shielded by the uniform, faced scrutiny that extended beyond Aisha's case. Other travelers came forward with testimonies that echoed her story, painting a portrait of an officer who targeted black people at a disproportionate rate, relishing the power trip. Photos, videos, and internal memos slowly leaked, culminating in a damning portrait of bigotry. Eventually, Caldwell was fired. The TSA released a terse statement confirming his termination due to misconduct and violations of agency policy. Publicly, they positioned it as one rogue officer dealt with swiftly. But Aisha, along with many others, knew the story went deeper. It wasn't just about removing one bad apple, the entire orchard needed tending. Yet Caldwell didn't fade quietly. He made an appearance on a fringe news podcast, spewing conspiracy theories about how the liberal media and woke culture had railroaded him. Despite his protestations, the majority public sentiment remained firmly against him. Hard karma, in the form of job loss, legal jeopardy, and public disgrace, had found him in the end. A year later, the seeds sown by Aisha's ordeal began to sprout. The TSA publicly announced a new set of rules requiring impartial verification measures and advanced anti-bias training for all officers nationwide. They also instituted an independent oversight committee on which Aisha was invited to serve. Though the reforms weren't perfect, and Aisha sensed a long road ahead, she allowed herself a moment of cautious optimism. If this prevented even one more innocent traveler from suffering the indignity she endured, then some measure of justice had been achieved. Aurora Innovations continued to thrive, launching breakthrough therapies that transformed countless lives. Aisha's personal brand grew stronger, no longer just the CEO of a biotech company. She was also a recognized voice in the fight against systemic racism in air travel. Late one night, Aisha reclined in her home office, staring at the framed photograph of her father on the wall. Tears prickled her eyes as she recalled his unwavering encouragement. He had always told her to be proud of who she was, to never accept less than she deserved. She wondered what he'd say about all that had transpired, the humiliating confrontation, the lawsuits, the potential shift in TSA policy. She fancied he'd be proud, even if he lamented that the struggle was necessary at all. "You did good, kid," she imagined him saying, with that warm, fatherly grin. "You showed them." Out of the blue, Aisha received a message from Officer Hill. The younger TSA officer wrote a heartfelt apology, explaining that she'd felt powerless to challenge Caldwell's authority that night. She admitted her complicity through silence. The message ended with a promise to do better and to speak up against injustice, even if it meant confronting her peers. Aisha read it slowly, tears gathering. Her entire journey had been marked by conflict and tension, but also by flickers of empathy and redemption. In that letter, she saw proof that real people could change, that not everyone within a flawed system was irredeemable. She typed back, "Thank you for your courage in reaching out. I accept your apology and wish you the best in your future role. Keep pushing for what's right." A few months later, business required Aisha to return to New York. She felt a pang of anxiety as the private jet touched down once again at JFK. Stepping onto the familiar tarmac triggered a deluge of memories of that night under the harsh floodlights. The confusion, the anger, Caldwell's glare. This time, however, the process was seamless. A new set of TSA officers greeted her with polite professionalism. No suspicious stares, no rummaging through her documents for hidden flaws. She walked through with calm dignity, heart hammering but steady. Her presence seemed to carry weight. One officer even stammered a polite, "Good evening, Miss Reynolds," in recognition. At the hangar door, she paused to gaze at the spot where Caldwell had stood, brandishing her passport like a weapon. It felt surreal to realize how much had changed since then, both inside her and in the broader system. The circle was unbroken. She had come back, not as a victim, but as a survivor, advocate, and agent of change. A small smile touched her lips, equal parts relief and defiance. She whispered a silent vow, never again. The confrontation at JFK became more than a single night's ordeal. It was the spark that ignited a far-reaching conversation about racial bias, abuse of power, and the courage it takes to stand firm against injustice. From that charged moment on the tarmac to the sweeping reforms that followed, Aisha's story captured the public imagination, showing us that true progress is forged through resilience and determined action. Her journey stands as a testament that even a single voice, unafraid to speak truth to power, can expose systemic flaws and demand meaningful change. Now, I invite you to be part of this continuing story. If Aisha's battle inspires you to challenge prejudice wherever you see it, then share this video. Spread the word so that more voices come forward to insist on dignity and fairness for all. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and join our community committed to justice. Together, we can move the world forward one voice at a time.